Grand Chief Dumas. Oh, he's over there.
Chiefs, thank you very much. If I may, I have a special request. We have a guest in our assembly. I'd like to call upon Judy Claassen to come and address our chiefs for a few minutes as we prepare to get ready for our next presentation. So I hope everybody enjoyed the muskrat steak we just had.
Miigwech. I didn't get to enjoy any yet, but now that I know what it is, I'm looking forward to it. Puju, ujashku baneshi disnakad. Medeni coming sandunte. I'm Judy Claassen. I'm from St. Teresa Point First Nation. I am the MLA for Kiwetnuk here in Manitoba. I'm the second ever First Nation female to sit in that Golden Boy building, and it's been an honor to take care of my people. It is quite challenging to be in a building that was never designed for our people. And up until last week, Brian Pallister literally called me deplorable because I made the association that the underfunding of our mental health services in our communities has led to many suicides. And for that comment, he got up, he tried looking at me, but I wouldn't look at him. And he said what I was saying was deplorable. And it's very frustrating to be in that house. But I know I'm being carried when I speak in that house, and I feel all the prayers across Manitoba. So I just wanted to introduce myself and to let everyone know that I am going after the federal nomination for the Churchill-Kiwetnuk riding, which encompasses 40 First Nations. There's about 90% of the riding is Indigenous people, and I believe that it's time for us, especially being an Indigenous woman, to take that spot where we belong, where we rightfully belong as part of the Canadian Parliament. It is another building that was not designed for our people. And I just want to ask again humbly for your prayers and guidance. I wish to be welcomed into your communities, because I know I got to do my due diligence. I know I got to go out and meet people. I want to go to, if possible, to every door in our First Nations communities, because I know that I can bring hope and I can bring faith back into our people, and I could do my best to uplift them. I don't want to take any more of your time. I am having a hospitality suite here, and Chief David, you have your hand raised. Microphone 14.
Mike 14.
Hello. Good noon. Chief David Bandugo from St. Teresa Point. I just wanted to inform my colleagues around the table that Judy is one of our members. I understand that some people may not be aware from St. Teresa Point. She grew up in St. Teresa Point. Her mother was originally from Lake Manitoba, married Charles Wood of St. Teresa Point, and she stayed there till she had to go out for high school. And she's a business major at university, and we're very proud of her to be represented by her in the legislature. I just wanted to introduce her at this point, but she will provide you with more information on her backgrounds and where she comes from, right? I just want to let you know that she is one of our members. Thank you.
Miigwech. Thank you for that. Yeah. We're very unique in the Island Lake communities where we're only third generation contact. So a lot of our traditional ways have not been lost. We still largely live off the land. And I'm very grateful that my parents both are teachers, were teachers. I lost my mom in 2004. But we spent most of our summers on our trap lines, and I really believe that that's where we need to be headed back towards. I myself am a third-generation entrepreneur. My grandfather owned and operated a remote fly-in fishing camp, Bolton Lake Lodge. And then I grew up in my parents' businesses throughout my life, and then I became an entrepreneur because there was no jobs in the community that suited my endeavors. So I grew up making mucklucks, moccasins, anything with our native handicrafts, and I still carry on that today. And then I actually, as soon as we got running water in the year 2000, by the year 2001, I was already owning and operating a 24-unit laundromat in my First Nation. And unfortunately, kids being kids, when I left my business to come for my Bachelor of Commerce degree here in 2006, kids set my business afire. So the business no longer stands, but I do know, and I'm well versed in business plan, land community planning and stuff like that. Those were my majors in university as I got my Asper School of Business degree, and I did that with honors. And I also have I'm on the dean's list for the Red River Community College for my business admin diploma that I got in 2006. And so I am educated in that field as well. And it was because my grandfather told me as well, what the young gentleman there from the presenter we had earlier, my grandfather told me that as well, to learn the white man's ways. No offense for using, but I'm directly quoting my grandfather. Learn the white man ways and use it, because we won't be able to survive without knowing how to work with them, because they're coming and they're not going to stop coming. And so I just want to close off. I know the next presenter may be anxious to go. I do have a hospitality suite right up at 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and it's room 616. Please come and meet with me. I definitely want to humbly ask permission to come into your communities. Miigwech. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck. Are you serving steak? Okay.
Chiefs, just one quick thing. I just wanted to mention something about Judy as well. Something that I have a lot of respect for. Last spring, Judy's brother passed away at the hospital due to difficulties with diabetes, and literally right after her brother passed away, she went to the legislature and she presented on behalf of the deplorable health conditions in the north, on behalf of her brother and the legacy that her brother had. And I thought that there was something very commendable, and I don't know if I would personally have the strength to be able to do that. So I just wanted to acknowledge Judy Klassen for her advocacy and the way she conducts herself. So you go say thank you, Chiefs.
Thank you. And Chiefs, we have established quorum, but I kind of like it that way, just proceeding with the agenda that we had laid out for you. I'm going to call on one more speaker that we have. I believe her name is Marcia Smook. And just in case for for reasons that she may be going on a flight tonight and going back, or whatever the case may be. But after that, we're going into Winnipeg regional area here, so we don't have to worry about that. And we'll officially adopt the agenda at that time. After Marcia as well, I think if you're good little boys and girls, we're going to take a break. So you can go and exercise a little bit and whatever. Okay, Marcia, please come forward. Please welcome Marcia Smoke.
Did they give you a bio?
I did get a bio here of Moccasin Trails, Marcia Smoke. Marcia Smoke is an Anishinaabe from the Alderville First Nation in Eastern Ontario and is president of Moccasin Trails. She has spent her life working with Indigenous peoples in Canada and in the international fora. She is an entrepreneur and has worked as a private consultant since the mid-1980s. She has worked on behalf of First Nations on projects which include mining, forestry, energy, tourism, water, resource management issues. She's experienced in setting up businesses, working at community development, fundraising, events planning, training, management consulting. She has served in positions that include First Nation Advisor, Director of Operations for a First Nation community, General Manager of Development Corporation, negotiator, researcher, and in the broadcast industry, both radio and television. Marcia's work has served to bring together Indigenous peoples globally, from local communities to international venues. She has traveled abroad to bring positive messages about Indigenous peoples to Europe, the Middle East, South Africa, USA, and Australia. Her presentation is found in tab 3 of your binders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, elders, chiefs and proxies, Grand Chief, Chief Deborah Smith, and thank you for inviting me here to present it on Treaty 1 territory. I was invited to share our experience working with First Nations and industry and how we bring together First Nations to work and benefit from development that is taking place in their territories. Personally, I have been in business for over 30 years. With my partner, we had a travel agency, Pash Travel. It was operating for 23 years. And after that, I started working in a totally different industry as Moccasin Trails. As Mr. Chairman mentioned, our information is in your meeting kits under tab 3, but I think I'll just leave the photo up on the wall because my presentation doesn't follow exactly what it does in the page by page in the meeting kit, so I'll just leave it at that for now. Plus, I might make a mistake on this thing, and who knows whose presentation will end up there. So, in order to start, I wanted to emphasize that in business, there are many challenges that we all have to deal with. And particularly now in the sectors where resource development and infrastructure development are starting to be the principal activity that's taking place in our First Nation territories. And the one question that I have, which I think that maybe you want to consider throughout the conversation that we're having here today, is that how do First Nations benefit from development in their territories? And companies that are coming in, taking profits out of the communities. We've seen that. I've seen it my whole life. And it's something that I've always struggled with in business, and now even more so now with the type of business that I'm involved in. Because as we see the trends that are happening now, I can speak about Ontario, which is where I'm from, and talk about some examples of the projects that are going on there. And the Grand Chief, in his opening remarks this morning, he talked about some upcoming projects in the next couple years here in Manitoba. So what's trending right now is the mainly in the transmission line area. We have 24 communities in Northern Ontario that have joined in a partnership called the Wataynikaneyap Transmission Project. And each of these communities, through their business that they created, have a joint venture with another company, and they share 51% ownership in the transmission line. And I understand that further down the road, once the project has been paid for, essentially, that the ownership becomes 100% by the First Nations. That's a $1.3 billion business, and it's connecting 17 First Nations, taking them off of the diesel generation and connecting them to the provincial grid. So we've got a $1.3 billion project there. We're just in the completing stages on the with the Henvey Inlet First Nation. They're over by the North Bay area, and they are they have a windmill project, and they're going to be the value of that one is about $1 billion, and they have a 50-50 ownership with Pattern Development, who is the partner there. I'm not sure how that ownership moves along, you know, as years go by. And another major project is the East-West Tie. That's a transmission project that's running from Thunder Bay to Wawa, basically over Lake Superior. And there are 6 First Nations who joined together along that route that created a company called Supercom. And the value of their project is $772 million. Those First Nations, too, have an equity share in the transmission project. So what I wanted to basically demonstrate here is that there are real situations going on in some of the resource development areas where First Nations are able to be involved, have an ownership stake, and basically I would encourage anyone who would like more details in terms of how that equity amount is reached, so that they can be a part of the project, to reach out to those First Nations and those companies that are doing that work. One example that I can give you, for instance, Hydro One. Hydro One, about 5 years ago, I was speaking with some of the Hydro One people in Toronto, and their First Nations and Métis Relations Department basically said that, you know, there's really nothing for First Nations when it comes to any kind of profit sharing or revenue sharing, because we just sell, you know, the electricity, and it comes on the people's bills, and that comes back into the Hydro One. And so they were kind of, and this discussion came about because there was talk about new transmission lines being created around the province. Well, I was really happy that our First Nations didn't accept that as no as an answer, and they proceeded to work directly with the senior officials, the president, right at the president, chairman's level at Hydro One, and said, you know, all of your transmission lines are crossing First Nation territories. We have never been consulted. They have been there for 50, 60, 70 years or longer, and it's time to pay up. And they were able to create a table that to have those discussions. And I don't know what the hydro bills look like here in Manitoba, but on our hydro bill, our service, the fees for the service could be, say, $100 for the cost of electricity that you use. But in addition to that, we have a delivery charge on there, which is usually about the same amount. And that's the cost to bring the electricity to the homes. And that delivery charge was on every bill. So what our First Nations leadership did was they sat with Hydro One, and going from the basic position that these lines are crossing our territories, no one has ever been compensated, they were able to have the delivery charge removed from all of our hydro bills, everyone who's in a First Nation community. It doesn't do anything for those who are not living in the communities, but it made a huge difference to the costs of electricity for people on the reserve. In addition to that, when Hydro One went public with some of their shares, they also went back to Hydro One again and said, you know, you're putting the business up for public offering, and First Nations want to have an opportunity to have some public, some of those shares as well. So they did that, and they managed to negotiate quite a significant agreement with Hydro One. I believe that there was no cash outlay, but there was an opportunity where over a certain number of years the revenues that would be received would be taken off the equity portion of or the cost of what the investment would have been for First Nations. So depending on where you're working, where you're who you're talking to, in what level of those businesses or organizations that are involved in you know, charging revenue or gaining revenue from our communities, you know, the story can be quite different depending on how quickly you want to move forward and how much you want to put into this. There are some other industries that are making advances. For instance, the mines are starting to look at where their potential development is. The way they have the technology, and I know in Ontario and Quebec, where you've got exploration happening, people don't even have to go out on the land anymore. It's all done on computer. These junior mining exploration companies, they can go online, go to a website, mark off an area of the province that they want to claim as their mine activity, and that's that. There's no consultation or anything with any First Nations on that. But when it comes time to do that mine development, then they have to start talking to the people. So the mining is something that's comes and goes, and it usually has to do with the price of the on the market of what the commodity is. Now, in the pipeline industry, I know pipelines are basically just running in the southern parts of each province, and but those opportunities there, I haven't really seen anything that provides any kind of ownership equity to First Nations, but I've seen a lot of messaging that pipelines want to be able to talk with First Nations and work out some kind of an arrangement with them to be able to do their work through their territory. The message is changing a little bit in some areas, and we see it mostly in the West, where they're talking about ownership equity in pipelines. Other areas are infrastructure development, when it comes to roads, bridges, could be winter roads, it could be all-season roads, access roads. So on that was just to give you an idea of what kind of activity is out there in relation to the type of work that I'm involved in. Now, Moccasin Trails is a First Nations company that provides environmental matting solutions that help protect and minimize environmental impacts on wetlands. It also helps to minimize impacts on any of our territories and also private lands. Beginning operations were in the sale and purchase of wood products for different applications. Our company has evolved into an environmental solutions provider with different turnkey services and goods to access roads, bridges, and work platforms. Moccasin Trails specializes in industrial matting systems that have the lowest environmental impact to protect and mitigate any risk of damage to wetlands and private lands. We are a supplier of access mats and portable bridges, and we work with clients to prepare access plans to determine the number of mats and bridges and the types of mats and bridges that are required on work sites. We buy, we sell, and we rent mats and bridges for infrastructure projects. And if there are a lot of mats, we also do a buyback so that they get used. They don't just sit somewhere. What Moccasin Trails did was, in order to be involved in this business, I had to learn what mats were. And in doing that, it took me a long time, and it also took me even longer because I wanted to make sure that if I was going to be involved in a business, then the business had to benefit First Nations in some way, because I did not feel good about just taking on a business and overlooking those, because those are the things I've been talking about my whole life, that First Nations must benefit. And we also need to protect the environment. So in the matting business, in your kits there, you'll see that some of them are showing on work platforms, some are roads. Those are basically to put down to protect the land that they're working on. We try to make sure that, or I tried to make sure that if I was going to work on these, I did not want to be, held up and, saying that I'm destroying the land or not paying any attention to the environment. And so that was really important to me. So I look at the matting as a way to protect the land and sensitive areas that the work may come close to. And that way, it at least gave me a sense of comfort that I'm not out there destroying the land. Even though I'm a supplier, and I may be a supplier to a transmission line company, I may be a supplier to a pipeline, I may be a supplier to a mine that needs an access road to get to the mine. So the next challenge, the question that I had if I was going to do this, is how do First Nations benefit from this? And it took me a while. I took the time to look at how we could create a business model to be able to involve First Nations. Now, Moccasin Trails is a supplier, and it has created this unique business model to ensure that First Nation communities benefit from projects that we are engaged in. Generally, on larger projects, all the purchasing is done by a general contractor. There is little or no contact with the suppliers, therefore, no obligation by the suppliers to support local communities. Moccasin Trails' business model is changing that. We are creating also an inventory of First Nation businesses who are in the construction industry and majority-owned joint ventures to join us in bidding on proposals that are coming out from major companies. We have experience doing this in both Canada and the USA. Now, in order to do that, I'll give you an example of what we were able to do. And I'll use a client that we have in Ontario. This is a company that, a huge company. They put their bid proposal out for a 3-year contract opportunity to renew for another year. So it's a one-time opportunity. I registered my business in their Indigenous Business Directory, so they, of course, didn't know anything about me, didn't know anything of what I really do. And I think just as a courtesy, they called me up one day and said, we'd like you to invite you to bid on a RFP that we're putting out, so if you just want to keep watching our website, then you're welcome to put in a submission. So I looked at the RFP, and what was required, it was for the entire province of Ontario, and what was required was that we had to have the ability to respond to doing emergency work within 24 hours. And we were also told that if you have Indigenous content, that would be a plus for you. So I know the other matting companies that would be bidding on this, and they're corporations that are owned by shareholders and equity funds, and so I know that just from the get-go that in order for them to bid on something, they would not have the Indigenous content unless they had some employees and or made some joint venture arrangements with communities. But I know that on this particular one there wasn't going to be. I like to think I do know what's happening in my province, fairly up to date. So when I put this proposal in, I contacted a business down at Six Nations to cover off southwestern Ontario, the construction company there. I don't mind saying the names. Six Nations, Acon, have a joint venture there. I invited them to bid on this project. There's a construction company owned by 3 First Nations up around Parry Sound area. I invited them to join us on the bid. Another company that is around the Sudbury area, and they joint ventured with a First Nation construction company on one of the communities on Manitoulin Island. And then another company that was based out of Thunder Bay. They're 51% majority owned by a First Nation person. So we really created and then we also hired a professional writer that knows how to do these proposals. So we kind of thought we had all the bases covered. And we submitted our proposal in November. They were supposed to make a decision December 1st. Well, they've been coming back and forth to me for the last 4 months with all kinds of questions, and I feel very fortunate that I've been working in the political arena too as part of my throughout my life. So I know the kind of answers that I have to give them to be able to satisfy what their real intent is. So they weren't able to back me in a corner. I got all the responses in, and frankly, we're coming up to May in a couple weeks. I think that the proposal that me and these other 4 companies put in have really backed this company into a corner because they don't know what to do with us, because their public statements say, we want to support and work with First Nations, and we want to, blah, 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 we're there for you. Well, and we're responding back to them saying, well, here we are. So I still don't have an answer on what they're going to do. I know that none of the other matting companies are able to match what we've put in terms of Indigenous content, plus the fact that we've got companies like Acon and Six Nations and these other companies that are well respected and successful in their areas. So it's a challenge for the company that wants, or the entity that wants to subcontract out this work. So we're going to just wait and see. I just really think that they just don't know what to do with me now that they looked me up in the directory and said, you know, they were, they wanted to give me some lip service and say, yeah, here we are, you know, send us a bid. Well, we did. So on the background in also taking care of our, setting up our business, I do work with non-First Nation companies just because of the supply trade that's required out there. And, but in order to do that, I had to be really clear with any partners that I had. And basically, Moccasin Trails is committed to working with First Nations in the spirit of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We recognize First Nations' right to self-determination and First Nations' right to the free, prior, and informed consent. We are committed to implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission Call to Action number 92 to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a reconciliation framework and to apply its principles, norms, and standards to corporate policy and core operational activities involving Indigenous peoples and their lands and resources. Also, to commit to meaningful consultation, building respectful relationships, and obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. To provide education for management and staff on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. We acknowledge this and will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. To ensure that First Nations have equitable access to jobs, training, and education opportunities, and the First Nations communities gain long-term sustainable benefits. Forging infrastructure with First Nations based upon trust and confidence is vital to achieving our objectives. Those are the points that pretty much verbatim that are raised in the UN declaration and the TRC calls for action. And this is again really important to me because, you know, my whole life I've always asked how companies, how First Nations can benefit, and what do we have to do to try to ensure that not all the money goes slipping out the front door of the communities when these companies do their work. So our business model is basically provides three options. The first, and I had to really dig around and ask a lot of questions about how the matting works, and it was just not a matter of trying to take a product and sell it, making sure it's part of the environment, good for the environment and so on. I wanted to really go in and learn about it, and in doing that, I was able to pull out how First Nations could be a part of this. And it's kind of one of the, dirty little secrets that the matting industry has that has never been shared with First Nations, mainly because there has not been a lot of relationship with communities. These matting projects are in southern parts of the provinces. They're out in agricultural fields, but they're still crossing treaty territories. And what I was able to determine was that when it comes to the price of the mat, there's not much that anyone can do to, influence the price. You can basically put enough markup on there so that you can, still keep your business going. But also, there was, because you're dealing with competitors all the time, so every time a company is going to ask you for a quote, they'll come back and ask you 2 or 3 times, and they're always driving the price down. And they're doing that with a couple of companies, so you're working against each other to get the lowest price in there to be able to get that work. So what I found out was that matting companies, those who have their own sawmills and their own produce their own mats, they prefer to sell the mat. They can sell it at a reduced price, but they don't talk about the turnkey opportunity that's there. They make that turnkey operation as part of their proposal to the contractor. And what that does is when it comes to installing those mats, I'm going to use a price of generally $35 per mat. So every time you install a mat, it's $35. If you move that mat down the right-of-way, it's another $35. If you have to move it again, it's another $35. If it's still in good order, good condition, you can move it another time, because these mats are meant for multi-use. And then it's another $35 when it comes to taking them out. So essentially, if you move that mat twice, install it and remove it, you're looking at $140 a mat. Now, on smaller projects where they might use 500 mats, that's $70,000 that's going into the pockets of the matting companies. In the larger projects, where there's 10,000 mats, then using those same numbers, they're walking away with $1.4 million. And in these other major projects, examples of the ones that I talked about earlier, the East-West Tie coming up and the Wataynikaneyap project, they're going to need an awful lot of mats. And if you have 100,000 mats being used on those projects, those matting companies are walking away with $14 million. And that's the kind of work that we do that as well. But we don't do turnkey unless it's requested. And if it's requested, we want to make sure that to seek out that First Nation community, or to seek out a neighboring community if it's not in, crossing someone's territory, and have our own workforce. We train at our cost, and we also try to make sure that that safety is a priority. Because when it comes to that kind of work, you need an equipment operator, you need a laborer, and you need a safety person. You also need equipment, specialized equipment, to be able to move those mats, because they weigh about 2,000 pounds. But that's something that when I really looked at and started having a look around the country on these projects that are coming in, I really felt that First Nations are not being shared the type of information that, just like doing the same thing that Hydro One did, said there was nothing there. So I get in trouble because I expose these things, and I'm not afraid to talk about them because I'm not afraid to talk about the truth. And I believe that our people should be aware of opportunities that can come their way. And I believe that the First Nations also need to be able to share in that kind of revenue that's being generated through these projects in their territories. So that's one option on how we can do on our business model. The second option that we have is straight revenue sharing. And we do it on a per mat basis. And in the event there's a project near your territory, it might not be a lot of mats, but and there may not be a lot of work that goes along with it. Or maybe there's no one, it's something that's coming up really quickly and no one is trained on how to do that work. Well, we'll do just straight revenue sharing with the First Nation, and at least something is coming to the community. And then the third option on the business model is if it's for instance, if it's a smaller project and there's might be only a couple hundred mats, then or less, because I mean I had an order for 18 mats one time, so it was wasn't going to bring much revenue to that community, but I was able to offer to contribute to a community project, something that where funding is not available, but we can certainly support that. So in that world, the matting world, there's other some of the details in terms of how that works is matting, the industrial matting is also known as cribbing. There's temporary work platforms or surfaces and bridges. Our matting is widely used for access roads, winter roads, construction and maintenance of transmission lines, and other heavy construction industries. Matting is a means of supporting heavy equipment on unstable ground in environmentally sensitive areas. Industrial matting is also commonly used to provide access solutions on wetlands to form expanses over narrow waterways, ditches, gullies, or similar terrain. Our mats are easy to clean with tightly compressed deck, making it impossible for invasive species to attach themselves to the product. Mats provide a load distribution mechanism that effectively reduces the formation of ruts, thereby minimizing associated negative impacts on the local environment. Moccasin Trails focuses on the matting best management practices to reduce even more the ecological impact and obtain substantial benefits for these clients. The matting will extend the seasons that access can be gained to work areas. They reduce soil impact and water quality runoff issues. They enable equipment to haul heavier loads. They lower equipment and maintenance costs. There's reduced travel and construction time. They protect water quality during operations. They minimize the transport of invasive species. And they reduce impact on sensitive receptors and resources such as recreation areas, agricultural lands, pipeline crossings, etc. In the case of remote access solutions for current conditions under climate change, we've looked at engineering floating road systems, flat land, non-flat land, rolling forest terrain, deep muskeg, extended oceanic bogs, deep wetlands with minimal deep peat bogs, agricultural fields, sensitive receptors. There's all kinds of different types of situations that we work with. Oh, question, microphone 14. Yes, hi, Chief.
Hello. Just wanted to mention that can we please respect the presenter? I think only Chief Turner and I are listening. A lot of conversations on the side there that you can barely hear and also, could you turn up her mic, please? Because it's very barely audible what you're saying.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, this is Chief McDougall, St. Teresa Point. Thank you.
Okay, how's this? Is that better? Yeah? Okay. So I was just getting into the business of climate change and winter roads. And just a few points there. Due to the severe climate conditions available in Canada, winter roads are failing across the nation. Winter roads are unpredictable due to sporadic changes in weather and higher temperatures. Snowfall often can come in late fall and before the ground freezes. And that early snowfall acts as an insulator so that the land does not freeze properly particularly in the muskeg areas. The road matting solution can be used over a long period of time with heavy loads exceeding 100 plus tons per vehicle. An aggregate road system in the higher ground eskers will be able to create a 12-month all-season road system. By integrating our floating mat road technology over muskeg, peatlands, and unstable permafrost, we can come in at a cost per kilometer less than the current benchmark amount that's currently being talked about. Of course, this will vary from geographic region. The mats are used to support heavy equipment on unstable ground, such as soft soil and mud, or environmentally as wetlands or boreal lands. And these are mainly on work platforms, work areas. So they're used as work platforms. They're used for temporary access roads on energy projects, including mining, pipelines, wind farms, transmission lines, oil and gas drilling, that's mainly out in the west, and to provide access solutions on wetlands. And some of the advantages of the matting road system include an increased longevity of the road system in place. It's easy to relocate and replace the road sections. It's a proven system for carrying 100 plus ton vehicles. It has a cost-efficient solution. It can be up to 80% cheaper to employ, and it's an environmentally friendly solution. In terms of the services that, I'll just go over this briefly. I've taken up quite a bit of time already. But some of the points about the services, we build capacity by training and employment with local First Nations. And as a mat supplier, we do that, we take care of that training. Our scope of services also includes the design, engineering, and logistics. So we can go out into any area, walk the terrain, fly over the terrain. We can do it on the mapping that's available now on Google Earth and some of the other areas, and be able to determine exactly how much matting will be required, and generally give a cost on that. And with our matting, Moccasin Trails environmental matting respects the laws of the Clean Water Act and new laws in climate change to protect and mitigate risks of damaging wetlands by providing low-impact environmental matting solutions. We see in our work that we do in the province of Quebec, they have new laws over there that basically if these contractors create any damage to the lands, then there's a fee that's assessed, and basically a fine for doing any environmental damage to the land. So we really have to keep up on what those laws are so that we're in compliance as well with the product that we bring in. There are different types. I'll skip over this. I just give an idea of the types of roads, but there's a half dozen different kinds of road systems that can be used. As far as logistics, the price is always the issue. And like I mentioned before, some of these companies that can run down the price but make it up on the install side, it's difficult to compete. But what I found is that our prices are still lower because we don't mark them up to the extent that where people don't know about it. I appreciated the presentation that was made before mine because that's exactly what I did. I exposed the other matting companies that are marking up these costs, and those who are paying the bills are the ones that are this is being done to without their knowledge. And because I became aware of how this was done in the matting industry, I'm not a popular person there when it comes to our competition, because in some cases we buy mats off each other, but I've managed to isolate one particular company, at least because of their practices on how they're doing price gouging, basically. So I guess on that, that's the story that I really want to tell, because in the matting industry, most of the companies are in Western Canada, and they have branch offices in the east where they've, like some have really started to settle in Ontario because of all the work that's happening around our province. And earlier, a few years earlier, when they were doing the project Muskrat Falls in Labrador, a lot of the companies went to east and set up offices in Newfoundland and Labrador to be able to get that business. And so the fact that I'm here, I'm First Nations, I work in the area where my community is, I work out of my community, but I've been really fortunate over the years that because I've been involved in the political world too, that I have made a lot of friends and a lot of acquaintances for the last 30, 40 years. And that has actually been quite an advantage, I would say, to me not having to make cold calls to potential First Nation communities. And it's been actually kind of nice because I can renew acquaintances with individuals and let them know what is happening in their territory or what is coming up, and if there's an opportunity to invite that community to be a part of that work. So in doing that, I also make very clear what what we can offer. And I've got one company. It's the largest matting company in Canada. They have served me a letter saying that, well, first of all, I just want to say beware of the competition, because the competition are still companies that we all do business with. They are non-native companies that will come along and say, oh, we want to work with you, we want to do a joint venture, we really support First Nations, blah, 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 and give that really, really nice story. But behind their back, they're sending me a letter saying, we think that you're taking advantage of the matting business by saying you're selling mat and bridges, because that's what our company name is. They're part of their company name. And you need to stop saying that you sell mat and bridges, because you're confusing any potential clients that we may have, and they think that when you're talking to them, they're talking to me, to the other company. And I think, well, that could be your version of what it looks like, but I'm only ever dealing with people that I know, and they would never mistake me for a non-native company that's owned by an equity fund out of Alberta. So it's a little far-fetched, but that's the nature of the competition. The companies, they want to see me gone, and I'm not going anywhere, because I have a really strong commitment to the work I do. I finally found a way that First Nations local communities can benefit from the work that I do, and I'm not going anywhere. And this company is still going to chase me down with their lawyers, and they've hired a top lawyer in Toronto. But I don't see any confusion. And I'm just using this little local lawyer in my hometown that close to me, and I said, can you make these people go away? And they just said, they have no claim. They're just trying to be bullies and use scare tactics, and they want to make you stop doing what you're doing. So, but I'm not going to stop. So, the competition is not something that I handle very well. I am aware of it. I'm determined to overcome that the same way we did when we started our travel agency. We opened up our office in a little town in Val-d'Or, Quebec. Well, it's in a French town. Another travel agency there went on the local radio station, the French radio station, and started saying all kinds of negative things about Pash Travel and how we didn't do this, we couldn't do that, and so on. Well, we operated for 23 years. So we we do have these challenges out there, and it's not to encourage them, we just keep on going. I'm not going to get down and roll around the mud with them because that's what they want us to do. So In closing, I must be close to I must be way over time. Um, You know, the matting industry is in Canada. We don't have a plant where we build mats, but what we do is throughout Canada and the United States, we have worked and insisted in the development of 22 local sawmills, which are basically mom and pop operations. And we tell them what we need in mats, and we buy all their mat supply based on the capacity that they can handle. And we also have an agreement, a right of first refusal agreement with the third largest mat company in North America, which gives us an inventory of about $1.3 million, 1.3 million mats. That we're just working on another supply agreement with the largest mat company in the U.S., which will put us way over top. No one will be able to reach us when it comes to having that supply. And the reason we go to the U.S. is because Canada is a softwood lumber industry. The only hardwood mats they make here is a mix of mats with Douglas fir over on the West Coast, and they have to mix a softwood with it. Whereas all of the hardwood is in along the eastern seaboard of the United States, and that's where the companies are making the solid mats. And the reason that we want good hardwood mats is it's a safety issue for us. We know that we don't want heavy equipment breaking over softwood lumber, and we don't want anyone to get hurt, and we don't want any accidents when it comes to that kind of activity. So I think the only other point that I want to cover is, I think I might have covered it all. Yeah, so just in closing, I just want to emphasize too that one thing that has been really helpful for me is the fact that I've been involved in our political First Nations world for many, many years, and I'm used to hearing industry, governments trying to, give the story that they hope everyone will believe, and I never believe anything government and industry says. So the political involvement is, I appreciate to have that experience over the years, and of course with the business involvement as well that we had. And we want to do our work in a respectful way. We take our advice from the wisdom of our family elder and World War II veteran. He's 93 years old. He's my dad. He's still very active. He's got a strong mind. He's healthy, and he guides us every day on what we do, and as well as other knowledge keepers and elders that we have the opportunity to be privileged to be in their company. We want to keep the balance. We want to work with First Nations. We want to work with industry, and we want to do a good job. But ultimately, we want to see benefits going to local communities and have that level playing field with the rest of industry. Miigwech. That's. Oh my.
So thank you. On behalf of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, we wanted to present you with a gift.
All right. It looks nice.
Are there any questions for our speaker? Okay, we will provide her contact information as well as the other ones. I've been asked to secure the contact information, and we'll send it out to the communities directly. I promised you a break. If you want to take a break, or do you want to continue right now? 5 minutes or 7 minutes?
Oh, okay.
My sound man needs to go to the washroom. Okay, 10 minutes. Please be back. We have some discussion dealing with the minister tomorrow, the national chief. We have some senators as well tomorrow to deal with, so we need to have all the chiefs here tomorrow morning. And this afternoon to hear from the message from the Women's Council. Okay.
See what Big Chief doing to you, boy? Eh? See what Big Chief doing to you? Got pregnant. Started getting great then. That's what happened to me the first 10 years. First 20 years. Nelson.
Hi, Nelson.
Little Grand
Grand Rapids. I just, I tried to get on your agenda here, and saw that you were very busy. So I thought I'd introduce myself. I work for the National Management Group. You've heard of us. What happened is we of our certified First Nations so that they can have access to capital. So in Manitoba, over $100 million has already been financed through the NMA, the various exchange rates.
Looks like we need $100 million, eh?
You need $100 million. So what we do is
We live off interest.
no, we're nonprofit. I'm not making any money. But if you're interested in hearing more about the financial management work, I'll write my name.
casino.
So, yeah, we can support you in developing financial administration law and really just help improving and elevating any finance companies that you're already doing, I'm sure. But we can support you in helping build capacity and recognize the opportunities before you.
So you make Sobeys, you can buy it to Sobeys grocery store?
So, like, that's what people have that do. Stole your pen here. Any finance is only lends for any project, right? And so these are the types of projects we manage to look at right now.
So you're like brokers, financial brokers?
So FNB is more like FNB, we regulate the people who have access to finance authority. So to get access to that lender, which is way better than banks, they lend for a long time and they don't take collateral. The terms of the Indian Act has prevented us organizations from going to the bank. And when we do get to
Well,
the
so
bank,
it should be for all creditors.
they charge us too much.
They should, creditors, as far as I'm concerned, should have no right to, if somebody goes belly up, they have no right to go after a person's belongings or whatever, because it's a mutual deal. And business is based on business, and you should, you borrow money, borrow credit or whatever from groceries, whatever, gas, whatever, but you take it under your own risk.
So the FFA actually lends on future revenue streams. So instead of taking collateral, give your name, your information, your social insurance number, your address, and the name of your firstborn son.
I can wait. You want my phone number too?
Your phone number, your email. Our head office is in Vancouver, but we have offices in Winnipeg. I live in Vancouver, so I just came over.
That's a big place.
That's pretty big. I'm from Musqueam First Nation, so that's as soon as you fly into the airport, you're in my territory.
I was in the Ron Lake Treatment Center 3 years ago.
Round Lake Treatment Center, yeah, that's near, it's the
Little bit?
Okanagan.
Little bit?
Yeah, yeah.
Kamloops?
I know the one. It's quite close to, the Okanagan.
So how do you like
We're also
Manitoba?
doing a big conference in May, in Calgary. Here, write that down.
What date?
It's May. It's May 27th, 28th. You should come. It's in Calgary. It's a national conference. There's going to be over 300 First Nations there. We're inviting chiefs. You might have already received an email. So let me just write one more thing. Well, I would give a presentation on who's FMB and why we exist. We were created for First Nations by First Nations. And
What's your nationality?
what's my nationality? I'm from the Musqueam Indian Nation.
That's it? That's it? Like no Cree, no Ojibwe, no Sioux?
Not yet. Not yet.
Just quick lip. Just quick lip.
So yeah, I would tell you why FMB exists as an organization and how we support First Nations from Starpoint, and then talk about developing financial administration. And I know that's not important, but I can make things sense. Yeah, we're working with half the Manitoba First Nations already. So like 50% of them. And so on the back here, we talk about our work with Fisher River, we talk about our work with OCN, because they've gone through the process and really led the way. And there's some quotes there from those chiefs explaining why it's a good reason for it. That sure is. Yeah. And so what you do is if you feel like you're interested in your community, send me an email with the name your next bill.
Is it mostly economic development projects?
It's for anything that's legal, chief. Anything. You can do housing, you can do investment, if you like.
Schools.
Schools, roads, major projects. Yeah, but it would just be great if you invite, all you need to do is invite us to your community, and we'll come and present. You can hear what we have to say about supporting your nation, help you develop a law, help you get certified, and then you might not want to borrow from finance authority. You might just want to work with FMB to improve your finance and governance practices. You might think about more down the road.
Sounds like you do housing codes too, eh?
We don't do housing codes, but we support First Nations to build housing if they have to do it.
Thanks for stopping by. We'll certainly look at everything.
Yeah, take a look, call me, invite me. I only come when I'm invited,
Cool.
okay?
Yep. You're invited. Look at this guy. Who's this guy? Hey, Terrence. You're going the wrong way. She only comes when she's invited.
That's what it was. I don't want to say the wrong.
I thought they took the wrong drink. I was going to drink orange juice. Apple juice just makes me shiver.
They took a break.
No break.
No rest for the wicked, eh? They should have just finished it. They're almost done. Yeah, eh? You just got a couple more. Oh yeah, the two more left. Yeah, that's so funny. I'm really tired. So we'll get through it. Yeah. This one, well, the last one. Should have finished this one. Take off. Girl, I could talk. Baby? Tomorrow? Who told you that? You don't even get there. Tuesday morning. Oh, I'll be gone by dinner time. I have to leave at dinner. Wait, but at 1. She did a presentation already? This one here, Buffy Handel? Oh, yes. Give a presentation. Oh. They're a VC. They didn't even get back to me. So, finding a conclusion on how to proceed. Just hanging around here. Okay.
For Michigan. Just kidding.
Grand Rapids.
Shayla. So I'm from the Muscular Indian band. Sure. Give him one of my spiels. He's like, what has he roped me into?
Oh yeah, I know everything about financial management board already.
Oh, you
I
do?
met with VC in your offices in BC already.
Oh, it's upside down.
Huh?
You did?
Yep.
Okay. Well, you're welcome to invite us to your community if you would like to get some of our services. So we support nations to develop a financial administration law. And if you'd like to be interested in borrowing from the Finance Authority, we get you certified to do that process as well.
Yeah, I've gone through that process already.
Yeah? Yeah? Okay, well, so...
I don't know what he's talking about.
All right, well, let us know if you need us to come and visit because we come at no cost and
Yeah.
provide services at no cost, and we're happy to support the nation.
Very good.
Okay?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
What's your name and where are you from?
Why? Where are you?
I'm Emerald Ballard. I'm with the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs.
You're with Assembly of Manitoba?
Yeah.
How come you're asking me for my name then?
Because there was a letter that was sent out March 28th and approval of FSA regarding emergency management. This is funny. I just want to make sure that you're aware of that.
Oh yeah.
So you got the facts? So are you going to ask them for funding?
I guess so. My name is Chief Harold Turner. My counselor looks after that.
Okay. Can we get that happens?
Yeah. Yeah, she looks after all our
Yeah, actually, I'm going to
EFN assembly this year. But they must have got canceled or something. Because there's something on Facebook asking for First Nations to apply to host the annual assembly. That's still. I said, so you want a number slide on Facebook before? They usually contact each like AMC and each province. Where is our regional chief? Nobody's seen him. Yeah, he disappeared and they're always dramatic. Yeah.
Okay. Let's get underway once again. Where's my runners? Can you make the announcement in the hallway? My lucky runners. Our final presentation will be Working Warriors. And I believe that Buffy's out here somewhere. I've seen her. There you go. If we can get our delegates back into the assembly. We have an established quorum at, as of noon this afternoon, and we will be dealing with the agenda, moving and accepting the agenda, as well as there will be a couple of resolutions from the Women's Council's presentation, following their presentation. That'll be the business of the day, and of course, the Minister of Indian Affairs is here tomorrow. The National Chief is here tomorrow. And we have some senators that will be here as well. So we need to have work on our quorum immediately at 9 o'clock so that we can welcome these people with their Manitoba. Give them a Manitoba welcome.
Are they going to do the presentation from
And
Women's Council?
for the outside discussion, I've been told that it gets a bit loud from time to time, and the chiefs cannot hear the presenters. So I would keep the doors closed and also to be whisper in terms of your discussion on the sideline. I'm going to read the bio that was prepared for Working Warriors. Working Warriors is an innovative inclusion tool and technology dedicated to the global Indigenous workforce. It exists to bridge a gap between employers, communities, organizations, and people seeking meaningful, prosperous employment opportunities. The primary focus of Working Warriors technology is to produce a national skills inventory of the First Nation workforce and their assets related to economic development. It's a cloud-based tool that can be used by employers and contractors to connect with the Indigenous workforce in Canada. The portal captures and categorizes skills, resumes, employment experience, business, local resources, and other important information specific to communities nationwide. And I believe Buffy is here. Please welcome Buffy Handel.
Bonjour, Tansi, Ewase, Waji. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Buffy Handel. As you already know, I'm originally from northern Manitoba. Some of you might actually recognize me for the 25 plus years of entrepreneurial skills, so being involved in business for over 25 years. I'm very proud as an entrepreneur to have been able to obtain my success with zero bank loan, zero personal loan, or any other proposal writing that was needed. Some of you also may recognize me as the Executive Director of Nemo Egwa, as well as the Coordinator for the First Nations Pavilion during Folklorama. Others may recognize me as the professional public speaker on healthy living, healthy lifestyle that gets delivered to First Nations communities. But today, I am here as the Director of Business and Development for Working Warriors and Running Deer Resources. I want to be able to take this time to be able to acknowledge all of the chiefs, as well as the delegates, and of course, all of the First Nations members who had worked very hard to be able to put together all that it takes to be able to create the assembly and make it possible for leadership to be able to come together and be able to get one step closer to be able to create innovative ways of thinking to better the lives of our Indigenous nations. And of course, I want to be able to take the time to be able to acknowledge our elders that may be present in the room. So of course, I'm going to do the best that I can to actually just stick to what you're seeing up on the board over here and be able to take a minimal amount of your time, as I know that it has been an absolutely long day and many discussions as well as many thoughts. Working Warriors has actually become, and it is becoming a very, very quick tool that allows First Nations community members, First Nations individuals, whether they are on reserve or off reserve, of course, being able to include the communities themselves. And we want to be able to do a very, very special presentation for you this afternoon because of the First Nations Community Development section. Before I go into the actual development in that section, what I wanted to be able to do is give you a quick run through about the history of how Working Warriors has come about. With a little over 15 years, First Nations Community Development, in 2014, RDR, which is known as Running Deer Resources, was approached by a mining company in Ontario to develop the means of including the First Nations people in the construction side of their operations. This led to the creation of the First Nations Apprenticeship Program and years of design and building. So essentially what this was that Working Warriors was the result of the many years of listening, taking that time to be able to listen and learn about the struggles that communities face, as well as the challenges even industry may even face while trying to engage in building those relationships with First Nations people. For years, we have been piloting and testing this particular program within communities and on the job sites, so we know what works and what doesn't work. Being able to apply that method to the tool itself allows this fluidity to be able to happen within this program. Throughout that duration, we take a look at some of the things that we know that were definitely a learning curve throughout those years. When you take a look at the First Nations communities and what they experience, the First Nations communities have limited HR systems, which is used as an excuse to not hire First Nations people. And I'm sure because I'm standing in front of leadership, we all know that that is always a very big issue. The Working Warriors really does pay attention to what First Nations have to offer. Bringing that to the forefront is always extremely important because us as First Nations communities, we do have a lot of valuable things to offer. But to be able to bring that to the table and know precisely what those things are is extremely important, especially when it comes down to the negotiations. We believe that where business is being done or conducted, this should boost the social and local economy. So when we are dealing with some of the business that is being conducted by other companies in our communities, are we necessarily seeing the boosts that we possibly could be in our First Nations communities? We always like to ensure that we're taking a strategic approach when dealing with industry and obviously wanting to engage in First Nations communities. We do need to be strategic about that relationship. And on the employers' end, we all know that employers will only engage if they're being forced to. And I do hear that when I'm conducting business in the city of Winnipeg. Being the director of business for Working Warriors and sitting in meetings with companies that are non-Indigenous, they openly admit that if they don't have to, they're not going to. It only becomes relevant when they're on the reserve. So this poses that question. Do they even recognize urban centers like Treaty 1 territory, City of Winnipeg? All of the construction, all of the different movement, all of the different businesses and the economic development that happens in the City of Winnipeg is sitting on Treaty 1 territory. Where is the engagement? One of the things that, when I take a look at the design of this particular graph here, this really actually gives a full scope because I know that even for myself, coming from that entrepreneurial end and being able to really kind of understand what exactly the consistency of how this all works, being able to see the full scope. I know that, when I come in from an area of expertise, I didn't know to what level until I was actually being taught how business was being conducted, especially with a lot of the major projects that are happening, not only in Manitoba, but right across the board in Canada, even reaching down into the United States. So when we take a look at some of those projects that we all know in the back of our mind, we already know what kind of projects that we have in our own minds. But when we start looking at this actual graph, it actually gives you a full description about what are the tendencies, what are the pattern recognitions that you can actually recognize in the process. So when you take a look at the graph up here and the project challenges, when you look at it, all starts with the project owners. And those project owners are wanting to be able to engage in the First Nations partners. And who are those First Nations partners? Those are the communities, those are the leaders, as well as the grassroots level people. Quite often when you see these project owners coming to the table to try to negotiate with their First Nations partners, one of the things that is always quite often seen on the Indigenous side of this negotiation is a lot of the First Nations partners lack a strategic plan to capitalize on the opportunities and realistic expectations that are not established. So, good example, and I know this even from my own personal experience, that there is a kind of like quota, a standard quota that is met, which is quite often requested. 25% must be employed. So if you're looking at a particular project, that is the standard percentage that's utilized in negotiations. 25% must be. But how many First Nations leaders today, right now, that are sitting in the room know that for sure with 100% certainty that they will be able to actually fill that 25% quota if they were sitting at a table? How many of you know the exact numbers and how many are certified within your community? How many of you have the actual numbers within your own community? Having those numbers will then empower you. Part of the other thing that you also see within the project owners is that the RFPs do not include engagement, information, of the responsibility pushed down the supply chain. So immediately right up on top of when the project challenges occur, right off the bat, when two different groups are trying to come to the table and try to negotiate, quite often what I see and what I hear on an industry side is we encourage Indigenous engagement. But when you think about it, what exactly does that mean? And we encourage. That means that they're not actually forced to do these particular things. So when the RFPs come out, that is already the first issue. Then that issue also can funnel down to that past the RFP process, where the general contractors lack the information and experience to ensure community participation. We see this time and time and time over again, that these general contractors don't have the proper information. Then it once again gets pushed down to the subcontractors and have very inefficient time and also have union issues. I didn't really, I knew that as an Indigenous person, I was standing there and thinking, well, why is this so hard? I constantly hear it all the time about Indigenous engagement, Indigenous engagement, Indigenous engagement, but why is this so hard for an industry to understand how exactly they could be engaging? But again, if you're dealing with, good example, a construction company, is that their area expertise, or is that the area of their expertise construction? Are they given enough time to really actually plan out how exactly they're going to be engaged? Because really, at the end of the day, even as an entrepreneur myself, time is money. When you finally take a look at, once it gets passed down to all of the subcontractors, the employment and economic development opportunities are actually minimized. To really understand the full scope of how many different hit and misses right throughout this entire process, right from the get-go, the middle, and the end. And the Indigenous engagement is getting pushed around because nobody wants to be able to take that accountability and responsibility that is required, or that should be required, for Indigenous engagement. Just recently, I was in Calgary at a summit, and I was doing a presentation, and 99% of the room were major industry players, and the rest of that percentage was Indigenous. And within that conversation, the very first thing that I had asked everybody in the room was, what does Indigenous engagement mean? Any ideas? We're not looking for right or wrong answers here. We're just looking for any kind of answers so that I can gauge where everybody is at. And not one single person could actually put up their hand and come up with an idea of how to engage. So I actually had to walk them through this process, because this is sometimes how foreign it is to them about what this even means. Same thing, a big word that's floating around, economic reconciliation. What does that even mean? I think that we are in a position right now, especially when we have such a graph like this that can really bring an understanding of the complexity and where exactly this constantly is getting pushed around. There are so many opportunities that are missed through this entire process. If the rules don't apply at the very top, where the project owners are and our leadership, this will continue to happen. This is pattern recognition. What we have learned is within the next little while, and we see all of our younger generation catapulting throughout this direction. I have a 3-year-old at home, and she probably knows the iPhone better than I do. And the direction of future business, all future business, is becoming digital. This digital transformation will dominate business strategies in 2019. By 2020, 50% of the world will see most of their business dependent on their ability to create services that are digitally enhanced. Within 3 years, all Indigenous communities in NA, North America, will be operating in a digital world. What does this actually mean for especially some First Nations that struggle with internet even in today's society? I know when I go up to where I'm originally from, I'm completely displaced from Facebook world altogether because my cell phone does not work. I do not even receive text messages where I'm from. The tool itself and the mechanism that is utilized within Working Warriors allows even First Nations communities that are struggling with the internet issues still be able to be brought to the forefront because their data is being put within the mechanism. Again, learning from the past and listening to what the future holds will allow us to design and build technology to operate in today's business world. Basic business pattern recognition is all about calculated risks. When you think about the calculated risks and pattern recognition, if we keep doing the same thing, we're going to get the same results. And if we change a certain pattern in which we're doing things, this will allow us to be able to create a different result for our First Nations people. So the different components of Working Warriors, when you look at how the Working Warriors tool actually works, there is a feature for individuals. Individual profiles enable users to access online resume builder, receive job notifications, search jobs, and promote themselves to the national and global audience. Through my own experience visiting different First Nations communities, I see the constant strain not only on Chief and Council, but as well the employment and training officers. This is one of the things when I did take a look, personally look through the tool itself, I was very impressed at the fact that there was a resume builder. This enables an individual to not just only rely on being able to go over to the band office or to be able to actually work directly with the employment and training officer to learn how to put a proper resume together, because let's face it, if you're a thermite welder, you may not be the best articulate writer to do a cover letter. But should that defer or deteriorate your opportunity, especially if you're certified, this becomes increasingly invaluable to First Nations communities. The other component is the communities themselves. The community profiles enables leaders and staff to promote and educate others about their community, as well as provide detailed reports about their community workforce and assets related to the economic development. This should actually capture the leadership's attention, because through these analytical reports that are generated for your own community, which, by the way, I want to be able to point out that all of the information that is within the Working Warriors tool about the community actually stays with the community. This is not something that gets released to the Canadian government. It is not something that companies get to access. This is your information. And what this does is that when you are trying to be a partner in an engagement opportunity with a project owner, you are able to print off your own community's analytical report. That becomes extremely important because it shows the demographic of male versus female, how many employed, how many are currently unemployed, how many businesses actually exist in your community. It allows you to be able to highlight the business that is from your community. And on top of that, just on a quick question here, how many of the communities that are present today, how many of you actually have a designer, a graphic designer that really can sell your community and the products that lie within your community, whether that is a couple of businesses that are actually owned and operated on First Nations. You would need a full-time graphic designer to be able to highlight that from your own community, while the Working Warriors profile for the communities actually acts as a website for your own community. One of the things that I'm also very proud at the fact that Working Warriors mechanism, so this particular, both for the individual but as well for the communities, is 100% free. This is at no charge whatsoever to the First Nations people as individuals, as well as for the communities. One of the quotes that I wanted to be able to bring forward, which is something that has become extremely important, is knowledge is power. If you do not know what value your community has currently in your own community, how much power in negotiating do you have without those exact numbers about your community? What is the education level? And that literally is printed off in one precise report that you own. This also has a feature for employers. So the employer profiles provide companies with a structured platform to be able to ease that part of that engagement with the Indigenous communities by using that tool for their project reports, their posting of their information, their jobs, the RFPs to individual communities by province or nationally. One of the other really great opportunities is that when the employers actually post, employers must be held accountable for the things that they say that they're going to do, which creates that transparency approach. They must be able to print off their analytical report and be able to follow this particular project all the way through and be able to come to the table with leadership or these First Nations communities and be able to show the exact numbers through their own analytical reports that they're required to provide for the First Nations people, so that First Nations people have a concise report going back to them, knowing exactly the particular areas that this particular company or project owner is following through with what they had set out to do right at the very beginning. Then, of course, you look at the National Job Board. This also is an extra feature in Working Warriors. The upside on this one is that you get free job postings. So these particular companies can actually, free of charge, be able to post their job postings, and this is national. Working Warriors is being used in over 280 plus First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities in Canada currently. Industry does support this particular mechanism. Now, I'm sure that anybody that's actually looking up there, that might actually catch your eye. Enbridge Line 3 replacement, Working Warriors, was implemented in communities in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. They were responsible for identifying and developing the First Nations workforce, creating a platform for contractors' engagement, reporting systems for communities, contractors, and clients, and the overall project management. Initially, Enbridge had a goal to employ approximately 400 Indigenous people. They were so impressed with being able to develop and have the workforce come forward that they ended up hiring over 1,200 Indigenous people. That is a huge jump considering that the original goal was only 400, but they ended up being pleasantly surprised about the workforce that was being supplied.
That's the real reason.
When you take a look at the Working Warriors business model, we want to be able to create a long-term partnership. That partnership on all projects, develop business model jointly. And when you take a look at the business model itself, the business model actually indicates that the share is 51% of all profits with nations. Earlier, I heard one of the speakers talking about those particular percentages and being able to ensure that the quality and transparency and honesty within conducting business and actually legitimately seeing the nations come to the forefront and be able to prosper and grow and be given a legitimate chance. You also take a look at some of the stats. So in 2018 alone, Working Warriors shared $1.4 million with particular nations that had actually signed joint ventures. When you take a look at some of the descriptions in the different areas that Working Warriors can actually fluidly work through, you take a look at the mining and oil, gas, agriculture, forestry, we're able to cover in those areas. You also look at the urban construction, hospitals, hotels, office complexes, and universities. You know, and when we look at some of those ideas in the commercial area, we automatically are looking at Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg. You look at some of the different towns that are existing in Manitoba. And then, of course, reaching into the areas of community, whether that's schools, water, sewer treatment plants, arenas, clinics, nursing homes, roads, airports. Being able to work fluidly with the provincial government, Manitoba infrastructure, urban and rural roads, highway upgrades and bridges. These are areas that our First Nations people could be tapping into. And then, of course, in the area of labor brokering, Working Warriors supplies manpower on contracts or full-time and all employment in Manitoba. And then, of course, Working Warriors can also be utilized for being able to obtain funding. And I know this even from the analytical reports that come out, that employment and training officers are actually able to use this particular analytical report that will enable them to not only take a legitimate look at their community and where their stats at. I mean, one of the most recent experiences that I had was being able to go north and actually help train and assist with the employment and training, because the driver's license issue is a very big issue in a lot of First Nations communities, especially going north. They have the limited resource where if you're wanting to get at one point, if you were wanting to get your beginners or even your full driver's license, you either had to wait for winter road or pay for the extensive flight out to be able to, and that's not even a guarantee as to whether or not you're passing your test or not. So limited opportunity. But in this particular case, through these analytical reports, what you're able to do is be able to actually apply for funding and utilize the analytical report and say, this is why we need the funding. And then once again, when you are successfully created and obtained your program that you had received funding for, you then can print off another analytical report and be able to clearly see how you may have been positively affected by this particular funding. And I know funders really do appreciate those concise numbers. Now, just projectively, what we know and based off of the research that we have been doing and keeping an eye on industry, in Manitoba, some of the opportunities for 2019, when we look north, there's several hydro and mining projects. You go to the central part of Manitoba, you have schools, school bundles and outlet channel. And in the urban area, you see north and south, water treatment plants and infrastructure. And then in the south, the Minnesota Transmission Project. This is just the small outlook on the value of over $1 billion that could be generated. $10 million profit in manpower supplier alone. So when you take a look at the 51% of profit sharing with First Nations, and you take a look at these particular numbers, and you want to be able to maybe even pay attention to the graph that's actually just to the right of you, because it does show those particular numbers. When I think about the potential and the opportunity that First Nations people have in front of them through Working Warriors, I know that RFPs are actually going out, and I know that these particular projects, First Nations communities do have something to offer, not only just in manpower, but there are some really wonderful First Nations-owned companies that should be brought to the forefront to be able to help in the bidding process and even understand the full scope. We have proved our commitment and business model to the First Nations people, and we are looking to strengthen our partnership together as one unified voice where we can negotiate long-term agreements with government and the private sector, which in return will create long-term benefits to the nations. This is our opportunity to write the rule book on how to engage with First Nations. We all have different issues in every single community. Where one community might actually be in the head, another community might be needing those extra resources. And this is where that unified voice is coming from, is that it's not necessarily that we all have to agree on absolutely everything. But sooner or later, us as Indigenous people, we're going to have to agree that it is time for us to be able to put ourselves in a position where we're creating our own opportunities, that we are the ones that are putting ourselves in the forefront, that we are making strategic plans to be able to create partnerships that allow us to move and catapult forward. This isn't just about a second generation. This is about now. When you take a look at those stats again, this is 2019. This isn't 4 years from now. And if we have the ability to create a unified voice that will implement and create the opportunity to say we all do agree that we are ready to start writing the rule book about how to engage in First Nations people, whether that is being able to hand that book or that rule book to the government or to the companies. Being able to put ourselves in that position and being able to write that rule book is something that is becoming increasingly important, because when you take a look at those stats, if we don't jump on this opportunity, this could potentially affect us in the year, not only 2019, but 2020, 2021, and 2022. Because those particular RFPs, we all know, are coming out. There are already, some of them are already currently in that process of being released. So once again, I want to be able to thank everyone for their time, the opportunity to be able to speak, and of course to having open minds and open hearts. And I will leave you with this one last thought. I'd like to think of myself as a young person, but I don't think quite often I'm accepted as a young person anymore. But being able to say, and because I work with young people, because I work within the lines of our culture, being able to speak on behalf of an entrepreneurial brain, being able to create a unified voice is becoming increasingly important for our First Nations people. Some of the things that happen within some of these negotiations, what industry sometimes does is they look for the weakest link to be able to shoot some money off onto the side, and that's not always necessarily the process that we need to have. We need to be able to write this rule book. We need to be able to come together with this unified voice, write the rule book, hand it in front of the people that need to be shown, need to be told how we are to be engaged. Because I'm telling you right now, with the amount of meetings that I've been in with industry, they don't even know where to begin to start. And they become more and more strategic about how to find the shortcuts to elude them away from that proper engagement for Indigenous people or First Nations people. So with that, I will be present again tomorrow to be able to deliver some extra information, as well as answer even any afterthoughts of questions that you may have. But again, thank you so much for your open minds, your open hearts, your time, and your attention. Thank you.
Questions? Microphone 20.
2020.
20.
Hello? Can you hear me? Is that working? Okay. Chief Batson, Pine Creek First Nation. Hi, Buffy. I just had a question. We did have the Working Warriors inventory done in our community,
Yeah.
but to date we haven't received any information back. Would you be able to check on that for us and see when we can get our database or some information? Because
Yeah.
we're currently we're doing an Elders Lodge project, so this information would be very handy to have.
Yes, and a lot of, for those of you, and that is actually a very good question, because one of the things that I always am really implementing is that I want to be able to have the leadership really truly understand that just like any other living, breathing thing, you have to be able to feed that information, right? And so these analytical reports, the more concise, the more consistent you are by plugging in all of the information. And remember, you own this information about your community. This does not, there are actual legality clauses against releasing information. So any particular community that is wanting to be able to ensure that they are part of this platform, but as well to be able to ensure that they're dealing with the exact numbers or the most precise numbers coming out of their community, I would always recommend that this tool is extremely powerful if Chief and Council request on a monthly basis from whoever is actually in the community plugging in that data, whether that's your employment and training officers or if there's been a CA that's been in your community, that is in your community, because quite often Working Warriors actually hires a local person from that community and to be able to do that for the community. And so by that time, that analytical report, there's actually a user and password. That is not difficult. And if anything, actually, if you were to go on your phone right now, not recommending that you do, but if you were to go on your phone right now and send the email, there's actually on the website, you can request your username and password, and boom, there you go.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? I'll either take that as a compliment or that everybody's really tired and had enough for the day. Again, on behalf of all of the members of Working Warriors, thank you so much for your open minds, your open hearts. Egwase.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll get into the real critical stuff of formally accepting your agenda. We've done most of the first day. We're at the very bottom here with the AMC Women's Council report. And I apologize for my my voice here, but I'm currently have a cold and I'm fading in and out. But I hear that, thank you. But I hear that according to the registration, we have the numbers of chiefs in attendance. We have achieved quorum, and we can proceed towards finally making some decisions with respect to the agenda. There are no changes to the agenda as presented. And other than there's one addition for tomorrow. And I believe it's at noon. Chief Hudson has requested for some time to present on issues surrounding hockey in Peguis. And the potential for creating an Indigenous hockey league. So with that, that's the new addition to your agenda at 12 o'clock tomorrow. Chief Hudson will present on the PEGWIS. So that's your agenda, and we will move towards formally accepting. Chief Batson, microphone 20.
Is it on? Oh, there we go. Hello. Can I just ask that another topic be added, and that is on the day scholars litigation? There's a lot of confusion, I think, in the communities and even with the band members about the process. So I don't know who we could ask to speak to that, and maybe also what type of assistance, if any, would be provided to communities to help our band members going through this process. So if we can add that to the agenda for tomorrow?
Yes.
Miigwech.
Okay. You want me to talk? Okay.
Chief Batson, and I'll need my staff to confirm this, but I believe we have that on our agenda for the next assembly.
Oh,
and we also have the different representatives about the day school process that will be in attendance to come and do a presentation to all the chiefs, if that's okay.
That's fine.
That's fine?
Yeah.
Well, wait, is that, yes? Okay, that's, thank you.
Okay.
Microphone 14.
Hello.
14.
Hello. Chief David McDougall, St. Joseph's Point. I'm just, when is the next assembly?
May 7 and 8. May 7 and 8.
May 7 and 8, so it's not too far off, okay. Because the whole community is asking what's happening with this file, and they wanted more information. And we were looking for our friend there. Unfortunately, we weren't apprised of his situation. He never told me or anybody what was happening. And I heard the unfortunate news over Facebook, and and I was still leaving him messages when that happened. So now who's heading this file? I just need to know, because I want to get more questions and answer, like clarification before the assembly.
I know, Chief McDougall, I attended a what was it now? A Facebook website, something. But it was telecast over someone's Facebook at Finisum. I believe that was on Monday or Tuesday, yesterday. There was a session on day scholars, and the guys that were present were the lawyers that are representing the day school litigation from Gowling. And I believe that Finisum was in a position to try and take the lead on the day school program, or the litigation and the lawsuit with the late Gary McLean. I do have some handouts that I can send out to the communities, but I do know that the final decision will be made on May 12, 13, and 14 regarding whether Canada accepts the compensation that's been talked about. And it's also a little bit different than the residential school compensation. That's about as much as I can tell you right now, but we do have some information. We can send it out when we get back to the office. And we'll get a briefing note done for all the chiefs. Chief Mitchell, microphone 8. 9?
Pop River, I am requesting an in-camera session maybe tomorrow sometime to deal with the issue of the AFN regional chief position.
Yes. Okay. I believe there's mention of an in-camera tomorrow regarding the regional chief as well as, I believe, the gaming because of the litigation that's ongoing. Okay, we have the day school information. It's on somebody's electronic email that'll be forwarded to your iPhone 6. Okay, registration. Jeanette, can you hear me? Nancy, how many people do we have in registered? There was 36. Okay, we have 36 registered, so we can proceed. This is your agenda. As I said earlier, we'll move to accept if we can get a mover and a seconder. Moved by Chief Batson. You have a point, Councillor Nelson. Microphone 20.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm proxy for Rosa River, Chief Craig Alexander. I would like to get, prior to this First Nation gaming update, I would like to discuss something that's very, like we have a statement of claim at Rosa River regarding our breach of the TLE, 1996 TLE. Along with that comes the province is trying to bring forward their Manitoba, Minnesota transmission line through our traditional territory. We're challenging that, and so when I look at the province is trying to refuses to come to the table on gaming, on tobacco tax rebate, on marijuana issues for us, urban reserves, all that stuff. So I want to discuss that tomorrow. How we're going to Manitoba, Minnesota transmission lines not coming through our territory. I'll tell you that right now. And I want to have a discussion with this because I don't. If you're going to talk gaming, province is not even wanting to come to the table. So I want to bring them to the table.
Okay. You want to add that to the agenda at this time?
Minnesota
Okay. So we'll add the Manitoba TLE breach, the transmission line, and gaming is already on the agenda. We can insert it at that time, right? Is that correct? Okay. Moved by Chief Batson, seconded by Chief David McDougall. Any further discussion? Question is called. Question is called. All in favor. Can we have the runners count, please? Count. We need the runners to count. 19. 19? 19 in favor? Any against? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. At this time, I'm going to ask my co-chair to take you through the rules and regulations. We need to do that, and we need to go through them in order for us to, our own protection, just in case we get challenged somewhere.
So I'm going to go through Appendix B, Chiefs and Assembly Rules and Procedures. Point 1, Official Delegates. 1.1, the delegate must be a chief of a First Nation in Manitoba who upon registration shall automatically be recognized as the official delegate. Point 1.2, in the absence of a chief, designated elected representatives or elected proxies who are accredited officially in writing by that member First Nation for that purpose may participate fully in the Chiefs and Assembly Forum. Point 1.3, each member First Nation in Manitoba shall have only one official delegate at all times. 1.4, in the absence of a chief who may not have an elected council, designated representatives or proxies who are accredited officially in writing by that member First Nation for that purpose may participate fully in the Chiefs Assembly Forum. Point 2, registration. 2.1, all delegates must be registered daily for the Chiefs and Assembly. The registration desk will be open each morning at 8 a.m. Point 3, quorum. 3.1, to commence the assembly, a quorum of delegates is representing the majority of member First Nations must be registered on the first day of the assembly. A quorum for the assembly is established when 50% plus one of all the chiefs, delegates of the member First Nations are present when the assembly is called to order by the chair. 3.3, once a quorum is established at the commencement of an assembly on the first day pursuant to section 3.1, the chiefs in assembly may conduct business and pass resolutions notwithstanding a quorum does not exist throughout the remainder of the assembly. 3.4, resolutions will be addressed individually. There will be no blanket resolutions. Resolutions which cannot be addressed in the time available may be deferred until the next assembly or referred to the Executive Council for consideration and discretionary action. 3.5, the agenda shall be adopted by resolution. 3.6, each chief or delegate shall have one vote. 3.7, decisions should be reached if possible by consensus. If consensus appears to be unattainable, then a positive vote of a simple majority of registered delegates will be sufficient to carry the resolution or decision. 3.8, only official delegates are entitled to speak to the assembly, and only official delegates may move, second, or discuss resolutions. Upon request, an advisor, technician, or other person may speak to a resolution or agenda topic. 3.8b, recognized elders are entitled to speak to the assembly. Provision to the Chiefs and Assembly Rules and Procedures, motion number 2, passed by consensus on February 24th, 2015 at the General Chiefs Assembly. Point 3.9, when addressing the assembly, delegates must identify themselves and the First Nation they represent. 3.10, when speaking to an issue and subject to the discretion of the chair, the initial speaker will be allowed 5 minutes for presentation to the issue. Subsequent delegates will be allowed 3 minutes on that issue. The initial speaker will be allowed supplementary time to further address the issue. Point 4, resolutions. 4.1, the Assembly Secretariat shall be responsible for the formation of a resolution committee. 4.2, all resolutions must have a mover and a seconder who are identified. 4.3, all resolutions must be presented to the resolution committee for scrutiny and refinement. 4.4, resolutions shall be moved and seconded by official delegates. 4.5, the mover and seconder of each resolution must be in attendance when a resolution is presented. 4.6, all resolutions adopted at the assembly shall be referred to the Executive Council of Chiefs for implementation. 4.7, all resolutions adopted at the assembly shall be deemed to have collective authority of the First Nations of Manitoba. 4.8, draft resolutions must be forwarded to the Assembly Secretariat for review by the Resolution Committee and advance distribution to all chiefs and councils no less than 4 weeks prior to the date of the next Chiefs Assembly. 4.9, until such time as the advance submissions of resolutions is fully operational, the current procedure of resolutions being introduced from the floor of the Chiefs and Assembly also be maintained. Do we have a mover on the Assembly Rules and Procedures. Chief Batson, seconded by Chief Meaches. All in favor? Any against? Any abstentions? Motion is carried. So I believe it's going to be Chief Meaches delivering the Women's Council report. If she's, oh yeah, she's there. And she's going to do it right from where she's sitting, as I've been advised. So that's microphone 10. Oh, she got her own.
Good afternoon, everyone. Francie Meaches, Chief of Swan Lake First Nation and Chair of the Women's Council at AMC. We're going to do a presentation on the First Nations Family Advocate Office. It's an update because we're looking for your support on an issue with the office. So I'm going to do a portion of the presentation and Chief Kennedy will do the last half of it. Good afternoon, everyone. I am here on behalf of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Women's Council to provide an update on the activities of the First Nations Family Advocate Office. I first want to begin with a little background of how the First Nations Family Advocate Office came to be. In 2005, a tragedy struck when Phoenix Sinclair was killed while in care of the Child and Family Services. At the time, the Manitoba government called for a public inquiry into the death and Phoenix Sinclair to examine how the Child and Family Services system failed Phoenix Sinclair. Honorable Ted Hughes conducted the inquiry to examine the circumstances surrounding the death. As appointed by the province of Manitoba in March of 2011, in December of 2013 submitted to the province his report entitled "The Legacy of Phoenix Sinclair: Achieving the Best of All for All Children." All of our children was released. On numerous occasions, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs requested to work with the province of Manitoba in developing a joint response to the Ted Hughes report's 62 recommendations, in which Manitoba did not engage AMC or Manitoba First Nations in formulating a response to the report, nor share the report before being public. In March of 2014, through Resolution March 14.06, response to the report of the Phoenix Sinclair Inquiry, the Chiefs and Assembly committed to hold and participate in a special Chiefs Assembly and an open forum for concerned First Nation citizens on the topic of First Nations, families, and child welfare in May of 2014. These two events were to provide opportunities to develop a comprehensive response to the Phoenix Sinclair Inquiry report. Bringing Our Children Home, which is the second slide. In May 2014, the AMC conducted open citizens forums, one in the city of Winnipeg and another in Thompson, Manitoba, where hundreds of families shared their concerns and experiences with the Manitoba Child and Family Services system. A report including 10 recommendations was endorsed by the Chiefs and Assembly through Resolution June of 14.01, supporting action on the recommendations presented within Bringing Our Children Home. Summary report on the outcomes of the Open Citizens Forum and recommendations for leadership consideration. At the time, a proposal was developed for the Bringing Our Children Home report and was submitted to both the provincial and federal governments. Unfortunately, AMC didn't receive a commitment from either levels of government to support the Bringing Our Children Home report. Instead, the AMC used to use its own source funding to hire 2 First Nations family advocates as the response to recommendation number 2, establish a First Nations advocate for families in the Bringing Our Children Home report. First Nations Family Advocate Office opened on June 1st of 2015 through ceremony where the office was gifted the name, I can't say what the name and I'll just translate it to our children are coming home in Anishinaabe. The first of its kind in Manitoba, the Advocate Office provides advocacy and offers supports and services to First Nations involved with the Child and Family Services system. Mandated by a Chiefs and Assembly, the Advocate Office responds to First Nations by providing First Nations-led solutions to address the Child and Family Services crisis in Manitoba. What we do through the First Nations Family Advocate Office, we have helped over 1,629 families navigate the CFS system. Supports and services focus on building capacity and reunifying families with their children. Prevention activities include reunification, avoided apprehensions, avoided birth alerts, kinship placements, securing visitations, and offering programs and services to First Nations families. Additionally, we have also seen a growing number of requests for guardianship and custody files. Advocacy and the First Nations Family Advocate Office process. For most families, the first step to assessing services through the First Nations Family Advocacy Office is to attend an orientation session. The orientation was created to assist families in further understanding the child welfare system and knowing what their rights are within that system. Following the orientation, families meet with the client intake staff. The client intake staff have a key role in identifying what supports will best meet the needs of families. Once the intake process is complete, clients are assigned an assistant advocate. Assistant advocates liaison between the family and agency to improve communication and identify all parties can work together. The First Nations Family Advocate Office empowers families to take a lead role in identifying the steps to work toward reunification. I'm going to hand it over to Chief Betsy Kennedy to complete the presentation. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Chief Betsy Kennedy, War Lake First Nation. First Nation Family Advocate Office statistics, I guess they're on the slide right now, have gathered statistics from June 2014 to April 2019, within 3.5 years. FAO have seen over 1,629 families walk through the doors to access services and supports. First Nations Advocate Office supported 934 children to be reunified with their parents, placed with families, secured visitations, and including avoiding birth alerts and apprehensions. Here is a breakdown for reunification and kinship placements per year, and it's on the board now. And so there has been a lot of advocacy from the office, especially since it's been increasing. And the reasons why it's low on 2019 is because it's a new year and it hasn't finished up. So they will be. So it really shows what the Advocate Office has been doing. And also there is a breakdown to avoided apprehensions and avoided birth alerts also on the second slide. In March 2018, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, the First Nations Family Advocate Office, established a partnership with Southeast Child and Family Services. Since arriving at SESFS, the Family Reunification Team received 411 requests for advocacy. Files are referred by Child Family Services, CFS workers, through the First Nations Advocate Office for families self-referred or families self-referred. The Family Reunification Team consists of both family reunification and family engagement workers. And it also has a slide. Since the partnership, the reunification team has prevented 66 apprehensions and prevented 13 birth alerts. I just want to say in regards to the birth alerts that the doctors are the ones that are providing information to Manitoba Child and Family, and these are one of the reasons why they're there firsthand if there are known, that our First Nations mothers are in hospital. But our advocate office really does a lot to be there right away and to help families before. And they really have, the advocate office has really helped a lot with the young moms or parents. So for more information, 78 children were reunified with their parents. 40 children transitioned into kinship homes and advocated for 74 family visits. Also on 101 occasions, provided after-hour support services to families in need and assisted SEFFS staff by providing transportation, helping families to secure adequate housing, and connecting families to programs necessary to complete case plans. Response to birth alerts. In Manitoba, on average, a newborn is apprehended every day. Birth alerts are issued for a variety of reasons. However, they are most often used by First Nations families and in cases where little or no case safety planning has occurred. Families who have made arrangements for their children to be placed with extended families are often disregarded without consideration. With the increase of apprehensions going viral, it has become more pressing issue for AMC and First Nations Advocate Office to address the practice of birth alerts and First Nations newborn apprehensions. Once the Advocate Office receives a notice of a potential birth alert, the Advocate Office offers preventative support and services to expecting mothers and families who are experiencing a birth alert. The Advocate Office assists advocates. The First Nations Family Advocate assists advocates, prenatal support, and grandmothers provide on-site support at the hospital with the goal of preventing an apprehension. The grandmothers offer a smudge and ceremony and a pair of baby moccasins to be given with a message of hope. The spirit and intent of gifting the baby with a pair of moccasins is rooted in our First Nations cultures and beliefs. In the event of a newborn apprehensions cannot be prevented, the Advocate Office will advocate for the baby to be placed with immediate or extended family and or in First Nation community. Program offers supports and programs. Offers a number of preventative programs and workshops and for our clients. Our assistant advocates and grandmothers facilitate a Red Road to Healing program for women who have experienced domestic violence. Participants learn about healthy relationships and traditional healing methods. We recently developed a Red Road to Healing program for men who wish to heal from the effects of family violence and build awareness of how domestic violence impacts our families and communities. There is a men's sharing circle offered every Thursday. Empowering Our Youth is offered to youth in care and former youth in care. Youth learn about rites and passage such as Berry, Fast, and Vision Quest. Are also explore men's and women's teachings. The Grandparents Sharing Circle is an opportunity for participants to learn about self-care and healing. Taking care of ourselves allows us to take care of our loved ones. It also explores ways of managing the difficulties that come with being full-time caregiver to their grandchildren while also healing from trauma. Settings Sites Right is a unique program that supports First Nations families involved with CFS and justice system by focusing on healing relationships through justice circles, mediation, and one-on-one assistance to support our shared goal of bringing our children home. Workshop topics include History and Truth of Canada, Understanding the Effects of Trauma, and 7 Ways of Teaching. Family Structure, Spirit Names, Circle Teaching, Identity and Belonging, and Loss and Grief. Program offered on 15. The prenatal program staff builds trusting and supporting relationships with families, where families learn additional skills and values to support them throughout their caregiving journey. The parent support program includes families who have been successfully reunified with their children. Workshops are designed to support families in succeeding and staying together. The grandmothers have an important role in advocate office. They lend traditional knowledge, teachings by offering ceremony and guidance to families and staff. The grandmothers implemented a new program entitled Grandparents Leadership, Peacemaking, and Healing Program. This program is designed for grandparents who would like to develop leadership and peacemaking skills that promote healing within the families and communities. Proposed mandate. In your package, there is a briefing note investigating of deaths and critical incidents in First Nations child who was in care or received services from CFS agencies. In many cases, through the review process or investigation conducted by MACI, Manitoba Advocacy Child, I think that's what MACI is that what? Space is not provided for First Nations, even though it affects First Nations citizens in Manitoba. Over the years, we have seen an upsurge in provincial system failing our First Nations children from 2008 to 2016. Information was gathered from our annual reports of the Northern Authority, Southern Authority, and General Authority of number of deaths per year per authority. A total number of 546 deaths in children in care were reported within the 8-year span.
In March of 2018, the Children Advocate Office, now known as the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth, MACI, was legislated through the province of Manitoba to expand its role to carry out review of services after the death of a young person, if the young person received child welfare services in the year before their death. The review process will identify ways in which the program and services under review may be improved and enhance the safety and well-being of children. This also includes reviewing any publicly funded social services beyond the child welfare system. Since the new legislation, the Advocate for Children and Youth Act, MACI, has released 3 reports pertaining to deaths of First Nations children in care. This includes documenting the decline, the dangerous space between good intention and meaningful intervention, October 19 of 2018. In Need of Protection, Angel's Story, December 13th of 2018. And 3, A Place Where It Feels Like Home, the story of Tina Fontaine, March 4th of 2019. Recently, concerns by Winnipeg service providers has been expressed regarding the MACI's approach to its investigations, including the report A Place Where It Feels Like Home, the story of Tina Fontaine, and called for her resignation. We are recommending that the Chiefs in Assembly pass a resolution at the Assembly this week to expand the mandate of the First Nations Family Advocate Office do investigation into deaths and critical incidents of First Nations children, and to direct the AMC Secretariat to seek resources to establish an investigations team. Moving forward, the First Nations Family Advocate Office will continue to provide advocacy and support to First Nations families and children that is respectful to their needs. The AMC Women's Council will continue to provide oversight and direction to the First Nations Advocate Office. In June of 2019, the First Nations Family Advocate Office will be celebrating its 4th year anniversary and will provide a fulsome report on its successes. We'd like to show a 14-minute video of the history of what's happened in the past few years. But I also want to make a comment about the office. The First Nations Family Advocate Office is one of its kind in across our country, and it's helped a lot of families, a lot of children. I myself, as a chief, had to reach out to the office because one evening I received a message from one of our young moms, her very first child that was born prematurely, and the baby had been in the hospital. And she sends me a message stating that her baby was apprehended. She didn't even get a chance to bring the baby home. Didn't even get a chance to be a mom to her baby, just to go and visit the baby because the baby was in an incubator and was under nurse's care in the hospital. And it's really disheartening to know that a young mom can't even have the experience of being a mom, being that young mom and nurturing that child, and that being taken away from them because someone feels that they're incapable of taking care of their children. And I know this young lady because I know her mom, I know her grandmother, and very strong women in the family that have been able to raise children on their own as single parents. And I commend all these single parents that can take care of their children by themselves, whether it's male or female, because it happens in our communities. So when our people are not even given that opportunity to care for their own children and raise their own children, then it gives me a huge concern of why does this happen to our people? And that we should be advocates for those individuals. They come to us for a reason, because they're asking for help. So immediately I contacted Cora, and she got involved, and she was working with the family. So now the young parents, they make visits to the office, and that's the purpose of this office, is to help our people. Like I have always stated in any of the assemblies that I speak at, we have people that are struggling out there every day, struggling with some kind of issue. And when it comes to child and family, we all have to be concerned. So we wanted to show a 14-minute video, and we're asking for your support in giving the direction to the First Nations Family Advocate Office to expand their services towards providing an investigation unit. So we'll present the resolution after the video. Thank you.
For over 30 years, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs has been working towards the restoration of First Nations jurisdiction over children and families. We have been faced with 150 years of study policy that has removed children from our homes, through the residential schools, through the 60s Scoop, through the former Children's Aid Society, and now the current Child and Family Services system here in Manitoba. Much work has led up to now, and along the path of asserting jurisdictions with our First Nations leadership, in the various decades, we have come close to fully reasserting the jurisdiction of our children. However, each time there is government intervention that prevented the course of action. We had a period of transformation from the former Children's Aid Society where positive changes were to occur. We had the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry Child Welfare Initiative, where the aim was to work towards asserting that First Nations jurisdiction. In the second instance, through the Framework Agreement Initiative, the Assembly Manitoba Chiefs made great strides, and again, that restoration never transpired. After the tragic death of Phoenix Sinclair here in Manitoba, leadership needed to develop a First Nations response to these tragedies. In 2014, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs hosted engagement sessions in Winnipeg and Thompson, where they invited First Nations grassroots people to come forward and share their perspectives on the current child and family services system in Manitoba. Hundreds of First Nations people came forward and shared their experiences. The findings of these engagements precipitated the Bringing Our Children Home report. The Bringing Our Children Home report identified 10 key recommendations, one being the need to restore First Nations jurisdiction, and the second, the need to create the First Nations Family Advocate Office. The AMC came up with the Bringing Our Children Home action plan and proposal that was forwarded to the province of Manitoba and Canada, requesting the resources to be able to put the plan into action. After numerous attempts, Canada and Manitoba refused. After the passing of Tina Fontaine, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs pooled source funds to create the role of the First Nations Family Advocate so that they could finally open the First Nations Family Advocate Office. Since then, the Women's Leadership Council took a lead role on child and family matters for the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. They also have a lead role for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. In the opening of the First Nations Family Advocate Office, there was much attention that was shed on the child welfare system in Manitoba, and it got the attention of Canada, where Canada came forward and agreed to provide added resources to expand the work of the First Nation Family Advocate Office. December 2017, Canada and the AMC signed a historic Memorandum of Understanding to further expedite the pursuit of restoration of jurisdiction. In January 2018, Canada hosted an emergency meeting on child and family matters, where they identified a 6-point plan.
Asserting our jurisdiction, it creates an opportunity for the federal government to actually find a solution to tangibly change how CFS will be administered, funded, overseen in this country, and that will be done through the auspices of our nations. Going back to
the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal pushed for the restored jurisdiction. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action identified the fourth priority in the need for federal legislation. In response to all these movements and the signing of the MOU, the AMC developed a 5-year work plan. Additionally, the AMC carried out complementary projects where they developed the Kiwiwin report that consisted of engagement with 23 First Nations and 4 town hall sessions in Brandon, Winnipeg, Thompson, and the Pas, allowing for grassroots people and members of First Nation leadership and First Nation service providers to set a path ensuring that our children and families can live in dignity and respect. Additionally, the AMC First Nations Women's Council developed a strategic plan identifying the preventative measures needed in our First Nations communities. In March 2018, Minister Philpott met with Grand Chief Arlen Dumas, Grand Chief Jerry Daniels, and former Grand Chief Sheila North Wilson in Winnipeg. At this time, Minister Philpott offered the opportunity to develop Manitoba-specific federal legislation to aid in the restoration of First Nations jurisdiction. Minister Philpott offered this opportunity to Manitoba specifically because she identified Manitoba as ground zero for child welfare crisis. She refers to the issue of child welfare in Manitoba as a humanitarian crisis and thought that Manitoba would be the ideal starting point to create change. The concept that was offered at the time was to develop a mechanism within Canada that would empower our First Nations inherent family laws. From that time forward, AMC sought out funding support from Canada in order to carry out the scope of work. In order to carry out the scope of work of creating federal legislation, we wanted assurance that this was the direction and the will of our First Nations people and communities. At that time, we initiated Kiwi Win 2, where we visited an additional 15 more First Nation communities. And in that process, we talked about the option of this federal legislation and ensured that this is the will of our First Nation people. In August 2018, the AMC hosted a forum on the restoration of First Nations jurisdiction of children and families. At the same time, we involved Lori Thompson in drafting the Bringing Our Children Home. The first draft was completed in September 2018, where ceremony took place. We hosted a pipe ceremony, sweat lodge, feast. In the process, we were asking for the guidance and expertise and a good path for the Bringing Our Children Home Act to travel. From that moment on, we had the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Women's Council, the AMC Elders Council on Child and Family Matters. Each of those parties met multiple times, each time making additional contributions and further enhancing the content of the Bringing Our Children Home Act. There was much pressure to ensure the accuracy and that the Bringing Our Children Home Act was an accurate representation of the 30 years of work of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, and that the Bringing Our Children Home Act was something that created a better future for our generations to come. In the beginning of October, the elders brought the Bringing Our Children Home Act to ceremony one last time at the Turtle Lodge in Sagang. In October 2018, the Bringing Our Children Home Act was then brought forward to the Chiefs in Assembly in Thompson, Manitoba. The Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Women's Council made presentation and motioned for a resolution to be passed accepting the Bringing Our Children Home Act as a way forward. A resolution was successfully passed, and later that day, Canada was provided the Bringing Our Children Home Act. There was an understanding that the Bringing Our Children Home Act would still enter into a process with Canada where negotiations would begin. Days later, we heard from Minister Philpott's office that while we were completing the work of the Bringing Our Children Home Act, Canada had initiated a different process for legislation. In November 2018, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs called for an emergency meeting on child and family matters, where they invited Minister Philpott to attend. At this time, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Elders Council and members of the AMC Child and Family Matters Steering Committee sat at the table with First Nations leadership, pushing that the Bringing Our Children Home Act move forward with Canada.
For your information, this video is just in draft form right now. We just wanted to give you an idea of what it looked like and give you some history on what's been happening with the First Nations Family Advocate Office and what the work we've been doing in relation to the Bringing Our Children Home Act. So there's a meeting tomorrow. Seamus O'Regan apparently is supposed to be here, and the Women's Council is having a lunch meeting with him as well. Along with that, Perry Bellegarde's going to be in attendance, and it seems like Perry Bellegarde is in full support of the bill, of Bill C-92. I did get confirmation from the Executive Council last month in relation to the Bringing Our Children Home Act that our Executive Council was in support of what the work we were doing. So we need to, I guess, figure out, discuss what we're going to do with the bill, if we're going to pass a resolution to oppose the bill because I know there has been opposition across Canada in relation to the bill. There's a number of communities and provinces that are opposing the bill, and this is the question that I'm going to have for Perry Bellegarde: is if there's that many communities and First Nations opposing the bill, why is he still supporting it? So I'm really confused as to what his intention is, or what the intention is of other leadership that are in support of it. I know with myself, I've been pushing for our own legislation here in Manitoba, because we're in a situation where our children are just an industry. Our children are a dollar sign. And it's sad. 11,000 children, which means in 20 years from now, we're going to have 11,000 people that are going to have issues, because you carry these issues with you into your adult life for years to come. And a lot of these children don't have voices to be able to speak for themselves. And who is speaking on their behalf? People are following the provincial policy that are legislated by someone else other than their own people. So I guess that's where I sit with the whole situation, and I don't know where. And I think that's one of the discussions we were having yesterday with the ladies that attended our council meeting, was the struggle we were having as women, trying to protect our families, our children, our women, our men, and getting everybody on the same page. You know, we can be really good at unifying ourselves, uniting, but sometimes it's a struggle to get everyone to agree. So we need to have some kind of discussion before tomorrow, and I was hoping that maybe we can do that briefly before the end of the day. Be good.
No, to add to children apprehension, I had my grandson was in the hospital because he had burnt himself from a water heater, from one of the homes, and he turned the water on. He used the washroom and he turned the water on, and he was only a year and a half at the time, and he like it just hot water, and it burnt his feet. And while we were in the hospital, my grandson didn't cry much, so they didn't send him. They said he's fine, and yet when my daughter started crying and says, his feet are smelling really bad. So when they got to Winnipeg, the doctor gave her heck for not bringing her child to the hospital right away. But it was the hospital in Thompson that didn't want to send him. So I had to tell our KTC staff that does the travel medical to send a plane. I don't care what kind of plane, even if I have to pay for it. Just for him to be there. And so finally, when he got to Winnipeg, and the doctor said, like I said, he got upset with us, and so they admitted him. But during the admission, a couple of days later, there was a worker from Child Family, and we were wondering how did this Child Family worker come and have information about our child. So anytime there's a child, even in accident, and they're in the hospital, they will be called, and just to let you know, and this is what's happening also. So they're very much involved in apprehension, and and we just want to make you aware of everything that's, what we would like to do and to prevent this, and what we can do to, to provide supports to families. But I do thank you for, for listening, and we do have a resolution on the Advocate Office. Are you going to read out the resolution?
No.
I take it that all the chiefs have received the resolution. They all have it in front of them. I'll read it over at this time. So, draft resolution April 2019-02, re-expansion of the First Nations Family Advocate Office to conduct investigation. Whereas AMC Chiefs in Assembly passed resolution June 14.01, re-supporting action on the recommendations presented within the Bringing Our Children Home summary report on the outcomes of the Open Citizens Forum and recommendations for leadership to consider. Bringing Our Children Home report. And whereas the Bringing Our Children Home report identified 10 recommendations to address many of the issues and concerns during the Open Citizens Forum held in May 2014. Recommendation number 2 included the creation of the First Nations Family Advocate Office, FNFAO, and whereas the FNFAO is outside of the provincial Child and Family Services system and receives its mandate from the AMC Chiefs in Assembly, and whereas in the past decade there has been upsurge of the provincial system failing First Nations children with a total of 546 deaths of children in care as recorded in the Southern Authority, Northern Authority, and General Authority annual general reports from 2008 to 2016. And whereas in March 2018, the Children's Advocate Office, now restructured as the Manitoba Advocate for Children and Youth, was legislated to the province of Manitoba to expand its role to carry out review of services after the death of a young person if the young person received child welfare services in the year before their death. And whereas the MACY has released 3 reports pertaining to deaths of First Nation children in care, which includes documenting the decline, the dangerous space between good intention and meaningful intervention of October 19th, 2018. 2, in need of protection, Angel Story, December 13th, 2018. And 3, a place where it feels like home, the story of Tina Fontaine, March 4th, 2019. Whereas on March 25th, 2019, Grand Chief Dumas sent a letter to the MACY to begin discussion of ensuring the involvement of First Nations contribution to a joint review process of the MACY reports and a potential to move forward in developing a new relationship in which a response was not received. And whereas recently Winnipeg service providers have expressed concerns regarding MACY's approach to its investigations, including the report, A Place Where It Feels Like Home, the story of Tina Fontaine, and called for her resignation. Therefore, be it resolved, the Chiefs in Assembly expand the mandate of the First Nations Family Advocate Office to include investigation into deaths and critical incidents of First Nation children and youth. And finally, be it resolved, the Chiefs in Assembly direct the AMC Secretariat to seek resources to establish an investigation team. This was moved by Chief Francine Meaches from Swan Lake First Nation and seconded by Chief Deborah Smith, Broken Head Ojibwe Nation. Submitted by Kayla Frank, reviewed by Jaren Hart, approved by Marcel Belfort, April 24th, 2019. So we'll go to the mover, which would be Francine Meaches, if she has some words to add to that.
Francine Meaches, Chief of Swan Lake First Nation. I guess what I want to add to this is there's been too many tragedies where I believe that our people should be involved in when it comes to investigations, because sometimes we don't get I feel that we don't get the true picture or the true story of what's happened. A few weeks back when we did the media release with the family that lost the baby, I mean, it was a real disheartening situation to sit there and listen to the young couple, a young couple that lost their 4-month child. This is occurring just a little too often, and I believe that we really need to add to what the office currently has, and it would really help our people a lot if we had some kind of investigation unit within that office. So, and the families would actually appreciate that if we as leadership, you know, did something like that. So I'm going to hand it over to Chief Deborah. Thank you.
Miigwech. Just wanted to reiterate what Chief Michos has spoken about, and the presence of a family that's in crisis, and witnessing that firsthand is a very difficult thing to witness. And I believe that when we start to have a voice in those investigations, that we begin to hear our perspectives. So I just wanted to express my support for this resolution, and I ask the chiefs in assembly to support this resolution as well. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Chief Michos and Chief Smith. Microphone 20.
Chief Batson, Pine Creek First Nation. I'm in full support of the resolution. Just for clarification, when it states that and called for her resignation, who are you referring to? The advocate? Okay, can that be clarified in there? Like, I don't know if you need her name per se, but maybe just put the advocate. Miigwech.
I'll ask the writers to. Thank you, Chief Batson. Anybody else on the floor? Discussion? Microphone 20.
Proxy for Rosa River, Terrence Nelson. I really commend the chiefs there that are that have done this, and look at it. This is really shocking. Like when I look at this, and in the past decade, there's been an upsurge in the provincial system failing First Nations children, with a total of 546 deaths of children in care. You know, when I look at that, it's really like, these are actual kids. These are actual young people that died. And it's really, I guess sometimes it doesn't get hit home when you see statistics. I like to take a look at pictures of these kids. When you did the video, and I seen the pictures of the kids, it really hits home. And I think one of the things that I remember from the residential school era, I know the lawyers in Saskatchewan, when they first started taking these cases on, there was no money. So they did a contingency to sue the government on residential school, and what happened to the people in residential school. It ended up, when they started hitting, having $450,000 settlements for people that went to residential school, all of a sudden Ottawa took notice. It was like, it was Ottawa that was responsible. At the end of the day, they're the fiduciary that supposed to protect them. Ottawa was supposed to jump in here and protect the First Nation people from the Crown, the provincial Crown that basically, or the province, when they implemented this child welfare system. There's 11,000 of these kids now, as you indicated. But the 546 deaths, I'd like to see some kind of a published book that shows their pictures, who they were. I mean, it really makes a lot of, to me, it makes a lot of sense. I would like to see a lawsuit against the federal government for not doing the protection of these kids that are in care right now. You're absolutely right. these kids, they don't have any protection when they go into the system. I know grandmothers and mothers that are just frantic because their kids are being taken away from them. Under the Genocide Act, United Nations, there is a clause, there is a definition of genocide, forcibly taking children from the group to another group. So that is a definition of genocide, what they're doing right now. I commend you on your work. I really believe that you're doing a fantastic job. I'm just making a comment that I'd like to see the pictures of those kids. I'd like to basically. I think if we were to do a lawsuit on behalf of the children, or to push forward a lawsuit, I think that's the only time that the government really cares. You can ask people to care, but in the end, the only time that they really responded to a residential school issue was when they start losing big court settlements. So that's what I look at as you got a residential school system in here with 11,000 kids in care. So thank you very much for all of your work. I really appreciate it, and I strongly support your resolution. Just a comment that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? No abstainers. Carry the resolution forward. Last resolution, folks, so bear with us. This one should be in front of you too. It's Jordan's Principal Equity Roundtable Conflict of Interest. Just raise your hand if you don't have it in front of you. Going to read it over. Draft Resolution, April 2019-04. Jordan's Principal Equity Roundtable Conflict of Interest. Whereas by way of resolution, July 18.05, replacing the Jordan's Principal Terms of Reference Official Working Group, the Chiefs in Assembly agreed to replace the Intergovernmental Jordan's Principal Terms of Reference Officials Working Group, TORUG, with a Jordan's Principal Equity Roundtable. And whereas the Jordan's Principal Technical Advisory Group, TAG, of the Jordan's Principal Equity Roundtable has the full participation of its members, which include the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, AMC, Manitoba Kuwaitino Okimakanak, MKO, Southern Chiefs Organization, SCO, the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat of Manitoba, FNISM, the Manitoba First Nation Education Resource Center, MFNERC, Norway House Cree Nation, one member to be determined representative of independent First Nations, and one to be determined representative of the Tribal Council Service Coordinators, along with the participation of Canada and Manitoba. And whereas the Jordan's Principal TAG of the Jordan's Principal Equity Roundtable meets regularly on a bi-weekly meeting schedule to discuss a number of policies, action items, and advocacy as it relates to the ongoing regional implementation of Jordan's Principal in Manitoba, and work with regional specialized service providers who provide a range of clinical services offered through various organizations regionally in Manitoba. And whereas these specialized service providers include the Eagle Urban Transition Center and the Manitoba First Nations Education Resource Center, which are mandated by the AMC and the Frontier School Division, the Manitoba Adolescent Treatment Center, the Rehabilitation Center for Children, Specialized Services for Children and Youth, and Saint Amant are mandated by the province. And whereas possible conflicts of interest to occur with AMC employees, chiefs, and appointees with AMC activities, mandated entities and committees, the AMC Personnel Policy Manual has policies in place for conflicts of interest, but there is no AMC policy on appointments to structures created by the Chiefs and Assembly, such as the Jordan's Principal tag of the Jordan's Principal Equity Roundtable. And whereas a potential conflict of interest is defined as an employee or director having private interests that could conflict with their public duties, which refers to circumstances where it is foreseeable that a conflict may arise in the future and steps should be taken now to mitigate that future risk. And a conflict of duty will arise when a person is required to fulfill two or more roles that may actually, potentially, or be perceived to be in conflict with each other. And whereas the TAG is currently working on its terms of reference, and whereas at the April 12, 2019 Jordan's Principal TAG meeting, a possible conflict of interest and conflict of duty was raised regarding one of its technicians who serves as a representative of a First Nations Provincial Territorial Organization, PTO, in addition to serving as a board member of two provincially mandated specialized service providers organizations. Therefore, be it resolved that the AMC Chiefs in Assembly direct the AMC Secretariat to work with the AMC Chiefs Committee on Governance Renewal on a draft conflict of interest policy to apply to AMC appointees to the Jordan's Principal Technical Advisory Group of the Jordan's Principal Equity Roundtable and other similar AMC appointments. And finally, be it resolved that the AMC Secretariat be directed to bring the AMC's approach to conflict of interest to the Technical Advisory Group to include in its terms of reference. This was moved by Chief Larson Anderson from Norway House Cree Nation and seconded by Chief Francine Meaches from Swan Lake First Nation, submitted by Jaron Hart, reviewed by Caleb Frank, approved by Marcel Belfour on April 24th, 2019. So I'll go to the mover, Chief Larson Anderson from Norway House. Is he here? I thought I just seen him. Microphone 11.
Beside here. So I'm supporting their process. But I guess the group that's been assigned to or tasked to come up with the plan around the Jordan's Principal funding has come across a couple of issues, and one of them is conflict of interest. So instead of identifying a specific conflict of interest and persons, put in a general motion to ensure that they put in a general conflict of interest policy inside their terms of reference that they are currently developing. So that's what this resolution speaks of.
Go to the seconder.
For me, it's just avoiding any further issues in the future to avoid that. So that's why I supported this. And if we all know what conflict of interest is like in our communities, well, you want to do something in the organizations also. So, be good.
Microphone 20. Chief Batson.
Hello. There we go. Chief Batson, Pine Creek First Nation. Just for clarification again, I seem to be on clarification today, I don't know. So with this conflict of interest, are we asking them to identify that they may have a conflict? Or are we asking them to identify and then remove themselves from the working group because there is a conflict?
It has to be a general policy around conflict of interest, and that if it's within their process to bring in the terms of reference and to include the conflict of interest in that terms of reference, and if there is existing conflict of interest, then they would be requested to remove themselves. It would have probably been easier if there was terms of reference prior to them being put in, but this is after the fact, so it is still, they are still apparently working towards terms of reference to follow as they go forward. So.
Hello? Oh, so are you saying then that this person would have to identify that and then excuse themselves from the working group?
Maybe not the whole working group, if depending on specifics. If it's a specific issue, then yes, of course, you'd have to step aside. But if it's, it's only one issue, then there's others that they can participate in. That should be fine. So as long as you're identifying there is a conflict of interest.
Okay, Chief Benson, any other questions, concerns from the floor in regards to this resolution? Somebody call question? Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstainers? No? All right, the resolution is passed. And that's it for day one. Building economies. And thank you for all your patience, Chiefs. We'll see you at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Bright and early. Just bring your breakfast sandwich with you and we'll get going.
Good. All right, Lon. Well done. Remember, the National Chief will be here, the Minister of Indian Affairs, and we also have some senators that will be here. So we have a big date tomorrow. Be here at 5 to 9. Thank you. Maybe 10 to.